Okay, when we think of schools, we usually picture a public service, right? But what if I told you to look at them as massive profit-seeking corporations? Let's dive right into this explainer and figure out exactly how we measure the hidden non-financial risks of the massive business of education.
To start, we really need to challenge the traditional perception of schools. Forget about just brick-and-mortar classrooms for a second and look at the underlying business model. Whether we're talking about a primary school or a large university, many of these institutions are operating as complex, revenue-driven enterprises. And you know what that means? They have to balance daily operations, strict budgets, and shareholder expectations just like any other company out there.
Now, at the K-12 level, we're primarily talking about EMOs. That stands for Education Management Organizations. Basically, these are private enterprises that manage the daily school operations, balance those strict budgets, and generate the revenue directly from student fees. And if you look at the tertiary level, you'll see this exact same profit-seeking model at work in for-profit colleges, professional schools, and online universities.
So how do we actually evaluate how these businesses operate and where their vulnerabilities lie? Well, we use the official SASB Sustainability Accounting Standard for the education sector. Think of this as the ultimate corporate report card. It's now part of the IFRS Foundation, and these standards provide the exact metrics that investors rely on to judge whether an education business is truly sustainable in the long run.
Here is our roadmap for today. We'll be breaking down 3 core pillars: data security, quality of education, and marketing practices.
And I want to point out that these aren't just arbitrary, made-up topics. This matrix is the exact framework investors use to hold these institutions accountable. It cuts right through the glossy promotional brochures to demand hard, quantifiable data on how a school operates behind the scenes.
Pillar 1. Data security. Let's see how these schools handle the massive amounts of information they collect. Because schools operate in such an open, highly collaborative environment, they are incredibly compelling targets for cybercriminals. Just think about a K-12 EMO for a second. They aren't just holding your kid's spelling test scores. They're processing thousands of financial records, holding valuable intellectual property, and storing vast amounts of personally identifiable information, things like national IDs and vaccination records. To a hacker, that is an absolute goldmine.
So the crucial point here is that a breach doesn't just mean a temporary hit to the school's IT budget. It creates massive social externalities. We're talking about real-world identity fraud and theft for students. And obviously that utterly destroys public trust and absolutely wrecks an EMO's ability to retain their enrollment numbers.
Because the stakes are just so high, the standard demands absolute specificity. There is a huge difference between a hacker just pinging a network firewall and someone actually walking away with the child's personal data. So institutions must disclose the exact percentage of breaches that compromise personal student data and the precise number of unique students affected.
Pillar 2. Quality of education. Once a student is successfully enrolled and their data is secure, how do we know they're actually getting what they paid for?
Look, if an EMO or a for-profit college cuts corners on teaching just to boost their profit margins, students graduate with high debt and absolutely no marketable skills. This isn't just a tragedy for the student. It creates a massive negative economic ripple effect of loan defaults that ultimately threatens the very government funding sources these schools rely on.
To measure educational success properly, the standard looks at 2 distinct things. First, the students who finish exactly on time at 100%. And second, a broader graduation rate that gives students up to 150% of the normal catalog time to finish. Why do they do this? So schools can't mask delayed success or hide students who are just languishing in a program, racking up tuition fees for years without ever finishing.
And the accountability doesn't stop at graduation. The standard strictly defines true job placement as finding a relevant job within 180 days and keeping it for at least 13 weeks. You can't just hand a student a piece of paper, wave goodbye, and call it a success. They have to actually secure gainful employment in the field they train for, and they actually have to hold on to that job.
Pillar 3. Marketing practices. This is where the business motives of education really come to light. This standard forces institutions to completely open up and transparently compare their budgets. It puts the money spent on actually teaching, things like faculty pay, course materials, and career services, right up against the money spent on aggressive marketing and recruiter salaries. It's brilliant because it shows investors exactly where an education company's true priorities lie. Because if a school, whether it's an online college or a K-12 EMO, prioritizes aggressive recruiting with misleading ads over actual instruction, the risks are severe. Pushing students into private loans they simply cannot repay is a massive red flag.
It can trigger devastating regulatory scrutiny, legal fines, and the potential loss of their government funding entirely. Consequently, schools must disclose exactly where their money comes from. They have to break down their revenue by government aid versus private student loans to highlight their exposure to default risks. If an education business relies way too heavily on private student loans, well, their revenue stream is incredibly fragile if the job market dips or their educational quality drops.
So the crucial takeaway from the standards here is that transparency isn't just about ticking a box for regulatory compliance. It is fundamentally tied to a school's long-term survival. By disclosing these metrics up front, a school proves its actual worth to prospective students and the market at large.
And that leaves us with the critical question to ponder about the future of EMOs and for-profit education. Can a school truly balance maximizing its profits with maximizing its student success? Because if they fail at data security, educational quality, or honest marketing, the entire business model collapses. Keep asking those tough questions, and thanks for joining me for this explainer.